Monday evening. That's why I never asked. But we got another big time SEC matchup: Arkansas A&M in Arlington. And right out the gate, I just want to get your thoughts, Stephen. Again, we're poking fun at your against the spread record, so I don't know if how much great info you can provide here. But were you surprised when the opening line? I don't know if it shifted at all, but when it opened, it was A&M was favored by 2 points. I believe. I think that was the number. But were you surprised at all that A&M was the favorite?
Very surprised. I actually expected Arkansas to be favored. I just think watching these two teams this year, to your point of the psychology of the rivalry, A&M has won, so I think historically it makes sense that A&M and A&M's historic success, and then the talent as far as roster rankings, A&M from a roster perspective, recruiting has ranked higher. So I'm not necessarily surprised that A&M was favored, but also at the same time, I think if you looked at the way that these two teams have played, I think Arkansas has was more likely to just to be favored because of the way they played this year. So it makes for an interesting matchup on Saturday. I'm really fascinated to see what happens, to see if A&M can keep going. And of course, I love the way Arkansas has been playing through the first 3 weeks of the season too.
Yeah, I just gotta be honest with you, Stephen. I mean that line scares me, and it's similar to last week when A&M opened as the favorite over Miami, and it was a large was it 6 points, and they were begging you to take Miami, and of course A&M easily covered. So I know the line is not necessarily indicative of a prediction, but they're just begging everybody to take out Arkansas, and that, like I said, that scares me. But let me ask you this: A&M, will they be able to take advantage of Arkansas's secondary? Because this is, you know, one game is a fluke, two game we got a problem, three is just kind of the way it is. And we've seen 3 games now where Arkansas, I think their secondary, I know they're getting Miles Slusher back this week, but it looks like it's a real problem. Do you think? But maybe this is a good matchup because A&M can't produce much on offense. So that Ken Max Johnson and company, who he was down a couple receivers, I understand in the last ball game. But do you think A&M has what it takes to take advantage of a potential weakness there on Arkansas's defense?
I think if you're A&M, you love the way that Anaya Smith and Stewart and Marshall and Yule Keith Brown, you love the way that those receivers match up against Arkansas's defense, especially the secondary, because like you mentioned, I mean, they have been giving up a lot of yards, and it is a real problem for Arkansas. Now they can alleviate that because the front's been really good. I mean, they lead the SEC in sacks. That also gets at the next question, which is, will A&M have time to throw? If Max Johnson doesn't have time to throw, it doesn't matter what your secondary does. And we saw last year too in that game, Arkansas won the battle up front against Texas A&M. I thought that was one of the reasons why they were able to finally get over the hump and beat the Aggies, was they won the battle up front. If I think when you start to kind of like wonder, like, what's the optimism here for A&M? Like, how can they win this game? And I think it would be Bryce Foster's back at center. The line gets better as we go on, and then they can set up just enough in the pocket to give Max Johnson time to throw and take advantage of some of those matchups on the outside. So I'm curious to see what happens, because we have one game of data on Max Johnson, and I think he is an upgrade over Haynes King, but I still would worry if I'm A&M, because the offensive line is going up against a very active Arkansas front, and the way Drew Sanders is playing the last couple of weeks, I mean, that's going to be a heck of a matchup between these two.
Now, do you think it's fair to say that A&M's defense could be one of the most underrated units in the country? And I know they get recognized as being a good unit, but I think we're all seeing the jokes, and Jimbo is overpaid, and this is a dumpster fire. Was the talk all last week, but I didn't hear anybody saying, well, this defense. I mean, they were on the field the entire game, Stephen, against Appalachian. That the dam finally broke, but I don't know. Do you think A&M is underrated defensively? Because I'm surprised at how well they're playing.
I am I think they are underrated. I think that was last week's game when it was trying to sift through, like, who do you like? Can Miami go into College Station and win? I think you had to kind of step back and go, A&M's defense is the best position group on the field, and they did what they needed to do on Saturday night. They were willing to bend a little bit. Miami had some nice drives, But I mean, keeping them out of the end zone and forcing field goals was just the right formula. And Miami's passing game looked really out of sync to me. And I think the scary thing, if I'm the rest of the SEC, is I think this group can only get better from here because you have a lot of young players, especially up front, that over the course of the season will get better. And the whole defense will get acclimated to what DJ Durkin is wanting to do as a coordinator. So I think from a matchup standpoint, I think just seeing what KJ Jefferson can do against this group is going to be fun. And I think the point is A&M's taking a lot of criticism, and rightfully so, on the offensive side. But let's also not forget that this defense is really, really good, and it's going to give them a chance to win a lot of these games going forward, especially if they can get just a little bit more out of the offense.
Yeah, and you may have just answered the question, Stephen, but that I was going to ask you. To me, the game is going to come down to whether KJ Jefferson and the passing attack can get anything going against A&M. I think that is the critical point to this game. What's your thoughts?
I agree with you. I think if we kind of start to like look at the keys to the game, can Jefferson and Rocket Sanders get going on the ground? But also, I am curious to see the development of Arkansas from a receiving core standpoint because Traylon Burks not being there is huge. He was one of the best big play receivers in college football last year, and we haven't seen that big play ability yet in an SEC game from Arkansas. I think the collective at Arkansas is good from a receiving standpoint, but they're going to need some big plays down the road, whether it's next Saturday against A&M, whether it's Alabama. So I am that's one of the X factors to me is can one of these Arkansas receivers connect on a couple big plays because that could really swing this game in Arkansas's favor if they can hit on a few downfield shots.
And last question about this game, Stephen. Arkansas, how surprised were you with that Missouri State game? I mean, I've gone back and watched it, and it's clear to me they weren't locked in, they weren't ready. But I mean, heck, they had a 10-point deficit in the fourth quarter. They finished strong to get the win, but man, they almost suffered a really, really bad loss to a team that I thought Missouri State overall looked maybe better than Arkansas on Saturday.
Concerning, I think, but also I maybe I'm wrong to do this. I didn't knock Arkansas in the power rankings too much. I still have them as a top 10 team. I think the concern I think or I guess the question that Arkansas will maybe we'll find out this Saturday is were they just looking ahead to A&M? And of course Petrino had every motivation to come in there and throw everything at Arkansas to try to win the game. And I mean, heck, they played well, but I think it's a good sign for Arkansas that hey, they fell behind and maybe they came out a little flat, but they rallied and won that game. And hopefully, I think if you're an Arkansas fan, maybe they were just peeking ahead a little bit to next week. So I'm not going to overreact to that. It is concerning, but I'll bank on some of these matchups that they were just looking ahead.
Hmm.